Welcome to the Land Use, Transportation, and Infrastructure Committee meeting of Denver City Council. Full coverage of this session of the Land Use, Transportation, and Infrastructure Committee begins now.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to committee this morning. My name is Amanda Sandoval, and I will be chairing our Land Use and Infrastructure Committee. As my colleagues join us, we had Mayor Council, which ran a little bit late, so I'll give us a minute. But let's start to my right, and we'll go down the line for introductions.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Paul Cashman, South Denver District 6.
Good morning, Kendra Black, District 4.
Good morning, Amanda Sawyer, District 5.
All right, so Zach, my vote cast is totally off.
Well, I'll get Ray out here, but let's go ahead and change the order and start with the blueprint update, since we don't have quorum.
Okay. Thank you. Since we're missing some of my colleagues and we don't have a quorum, we'll change the order of the agenda, and we will start with Blueprint Denver and update. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, David Gaspers, Principal City Planner in Community Planning and Development. And thanks for taking me first today on the agenda for your annual reports on the comprehensive plan and Blueprint Denver.
Thank you.
I'll just go over a quick overview of the annual reporting, talk about tracking implementation, highlights of the different metrics that we use, and some of the work that is underway, as well as take any questions that you may have. Remember, we adopted Comprehensive Plan 2040 in April of 2019. It's the overarching citywide plan for the city and county of Denver. We have 6 vision elements: equitable, affordable, and inclusive, strong and authentic neighborhoods, connected, safe, and accessible places, economically diverse and vibrant, environmentally resilient, and healthy and active. All of our plans, our neighborhood plans and other plans are based off of these 6 vision elements. That includes Blueprint Denver, which is an appendix to the comprehensive plan. It's our vision for an inclusive city. Here we have 3 major tenets: an equitable city, a city of complete neighborhoods and networks, and an evolving city. Whenever you see plans or planning efforts coming through City Council, those are kind of our backbone plans. Both of those documents call out very specifically that we should have annual reporting to both Planning Board and City Council so we can track our progress with implementation and evaluate if we need a plan update of any sort. And so those are very specific that we want to come here every year. And we're usually here a little bit earlier. We would typically want to be here around March, but we had some delay in the census data, which has pushed us back a few months before we could get in front of this body. The annual reports are web-based reports. So they're story maps that are all based online. It includes the executive summary, and then with the updated metrics, any updated maps, and all of our key implementation efforts. We also have a far more detailed implementation matrix for both plans that lists out every single policy and strategy in those documents, and then identify the programs and projects that not just CPD, but all of our implementing city agencies and departments. So DOTI, DDPHE, DIDO and NEST, DPR, Finance, Host, CASAR, Arts and Venues. I'm probably forgetting a few. I have a few staff members from those departments here with me today if there's any questions on the implementation efforts. And of course, we're here with Ludi today. Here are the links to the annual reports as well as those implementation matrices that you can access all the information from. I'll just go through some of the highlights of the metrics and then open it up to questions. We do have 6 metrics from the comprehensive plan, 1 for each of the vision elements and 7 for Blueprint Denver. The intent here when we developed these was not to have a metric for every single possible thing, but try to roll these up and have these kind of overarching metrics that can serve as a proxy for plan implementation. We also have the updates to the key equity concepts. So that's access to opportunity, vulnerability to displacement, and the housing and jobs diversity maps. And then I'll quickly touch on map updates for Blueprint Denver, which we typically would have for our neighborhood contexts, places, street types, and modal priorities. So on to the metrics highlights, and we'll start with 2 from the comprehensive plan. The first one is the innovative jobs metrics that DIDO does a great job with managing this data and updating it every single year for us. This is where we focus on tracking innovative jobs, so jobs in diverse, innovative, and growing economic sectors, and comparing that across our citywide job total goal of 60% by 2040. Started around 51.5% in 2017 when we started tracking this metric, and jump up to almost 56% in the last calendar year. Another comprehensive plan metric, this one based off of CASAR and carbon emissions. So this is interesting, a positive trend line here. When we adopted this plan, the citywide goal was to reduce carbon emissions by 80% by 2050 from a 2005 base. So that's what you see here. You're well aware probably that they've updated the citywide goal here. So once we do an update to the comprehensive plan, we'll probably update this metric as well. But they're looking to reduce the GHG emissions to 0 by 2040, I believe. So a positive trend line on this, but a long ways to go, obviously. And then a few from Blueprint Denver I'd like to highlight. One that we've been using dating back to the previous Blueprint Denver document was the ratio of private investment in our high growth areas to all other parts of the city. We have a historical average of 5-to-1 when we were looking at areas of change and area of stability in the old Blueprint Denver. Last year we saw a dip in this ratio, probably a COVID symptom there of the economy. We saw a significant uptick here at over 6-to-1 in last year with private investment in our high growth areas. A couple of more Blueprint Denver metrics, the one on the left here, new jobs in high growth areas. So again, here we're tracking the percent of new jobs in our centers and corridors, and we now have enough data to start showing a cumulative number here. So from 2016 to 2019, we're at 72%. Historically, with the old Blueprint Denver, we were only at 64%, our target at 90%. In fact, this year we actually had a small tick down on total amount of jobs. So it was helpful to have the cumulative average here to tell the story that we're still trending in the right direction. An even more positive metric, I would say, is the new housing in high growth areas. So the same geography, trying to track new housing starts in our high growth areas. Cumulatively, over the last 3 years, 81% of all new housing starts are in those growth areas. In 2021, it was over 90% of all new housing permits were in our high growth areas. Target is at 80%. And with historic surveys and pattern books, this is a metric where we're trying to build the percentage of the city that has been surveyed by Discover Denver or has an established pattern book, typically done with our neighborhood planning initiative, small area plans, goal of 100% by 2040. And we started around 6%. We're now at 25% of the city with either a survey or a pattern book established for it. I do want to highlight at least one metric that's not going in the right direction and still has a lot of work to do. Vision Zero did have a down turn last year, again, probably from a COVID impact of the amount of traffic that were off the streets in 2020, but a significant rebound here, and in fact, a number at 465, either traffic-related deaths or serious injuries, which was higher than 2019. Obviously, Dottie is working very hard to try to correct this trend, and it's a 2030 target, so there's a lot of work to be done here, but all of their work with their multimodal infrastructure, improvements to intersections, et cetera, are trying to get this to turn in the right direction. Another thing I always want to highlight is the update to the equity concepts. All the data gets updated in all these maps every single year. So we have access to opportunity, vulnerability to displacement, and the housing diversity and jobs diversity maps that have new data. And we highlight the changes, the shifting to less or more, either in this instance, vulnerable to displacement, to highlight areas that are kind of moving one direction or the other. We also have the tracking vulnerability to displacement map tool. I think we presented the annual reports a few years ago, and there's a desire from this body to see a lot more data when it comes to vulnerability to displacement. So we developed this mapping tool that has a lot more in-depth data that we can really take a deep dive in each neighborhood and look at the factors that make that metric move. And then the mapped updates. Normally, we would have some changes to the maps due to an adopted small area plan. In this case, we didn't have any adopted small area plans in 2021, so there's no changes to the Blueprint Denver maps. We do expect changes next year with the West Area Plan and the Far Northeast Area Plan amendment, probably making changes to our Future Places map. Just want to highlight some of the implementation efforts that we have in the annual reports, as well as in the implementation matrices. First is a family business preservation program from DEDO, where they have the opportunity to focus on family businesses in neighborhoods that are vulnerable for displacement. CASAR has a focus on implementing the Energize Denver Ordinance, which has various different training and educational opportunities, as well as compliance efforts. And then there's the Metro DPA Social Equity Program. This is a recently launched program that has had a lot of media press the last few months, which provides up to $25,000 in down payment assistance for descendants of residents of historically redlined areas. The prioritization policy is a policy that DEDO is working on this year that would prioritize residents that are vulnerable for displacement or have been recently displaced to return to their neighborhoods. Dottie continues to work on Denver Moves Everyone. This is their strategic transportation plan. It's been ongoing now for the last year or so, and hopefully we'll be wrapping up this year, that lays out the strategic implementation efforts across all modes for Dottie. The e-bike library is another one that's got a bit of press recently. CASAR worked with a couple different transportation management associations to deploy 70 bikes in underserved neighborhoods for commuting. And then the strategic acquisition plan for parks. This is Denver Parks and Rec's plan for acquisition of parks and open space across the entire city. All right, and that's it. So I'm open to questions or comments.
Do we have any questions from our colleagues? Councilman Sawyer, go ahead.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks for this. Really appreciate the updates. Just curious, you know, it's been nice to see the implementation of the two sort of broader citywide plans and exactly how that breaks down by agency. There are some agencies that weren't mentioned on here. Curious whether you kind of have a table or some sort of tracking mechanism where you're seeing each agency and how, and you know what that work is that's kind of fitting into the implementation of these plans.
Yeah, so the implementation matrix that we have for each document, both for Blueprint and the comprehensive plan, has every single policy and strategy, and then we have the different programs or projects that not only, I'm sure I probably missed a few to your point on my slide, but any project that we've identified that we feel is implementing or moving forward a policy or strategy within the documents are highlighted, and then the agency or department is identified. If there's any website or other information, then we link it there as well. So you can take a look at those implementation kind of matrices and have a really deep dive on everything that we're doing across both citywide plans. I suppose you could sort those. There's a column for kind of lead agency. You could sort by that, I suppose, and identify all the different projects that Dottie or Dito or whatever is doing. I don't have it just by department.
That's okay. I appreciate that explanation. I will definitely go and take a look at that because I think it would be really interesting to kind of make a determination of, or see, I'm a visual person, so see what that implementation actually looks like kind of on a per agency scale. Sure. Because I guess I wonder, you know, for example, if we're looking at Dito, right, there are citywide things that we're doing. There's a creation of NEST. Was the creation of the NEST program counted as part of the implementation, or is what the NEST program is doing counted as implementation, or both? Like, sure. It would be valuable for us to kind of be able to assess the value of each of the projects that city agencies are doing based on, you know, an implementation schedule. I say this only because, you know, one of my greatest challenges and frustrations is that we have this neighborhood plan in my area that is not really being implemented, and I want more implementation. So I want to kind of see how that works on the broader scale to be able to start to figure that out. So appreciate it. One of the other things that I can't even remember what slide it was, I apologize, but you had talked a little bit about, it was a slide with bullets and there were the three underneath, and one of them was gentrification and displacement. Did I describe that well enough for you to find it?
Yes.
Okay. Can you tell me what slide number it is?
Oh, shucks.
It's okay if you get, oh, they pulled it up. We're good.
Yeah, slide 10. Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you. So as we're looking at the access to opportunity, vulnerability, displacement, you know, the three metrics that they just pulled up on the screen, is there a way for us to make a clear determination of exactly what policies the agencies are implementing in order to address those? My specific question is around the vulnerability to displacement, because what we see since the implementation, since the adoption of these plans in early 2019, is that vulnerability to displacement has gotten worse, not better. And there are a lot of reasons for that. I certainly don't mean to suggest that some people, people aren't doing their job or anything like that, right? We have an extraordinary pandemic over the last couple of years, but the result of that is that vulnerability to displacement in particular has gotten worse. Land cost is going up, inflation is going up, people's salaries are not going up. So I'm curious what exactly the policies are that we are focusing on to address that vulnerability to displacement issue.
Sure.
And I don't know that you can answer that question, right?
and
Because agency, there are lots of agencies and there's lots of work being done. I just don't see a simple answer to that question or even a complicated answer to that question.
Sure.
But it's the single most important question we need to be asking in our city right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So I probably won't answer it specifically to your point.
It's okay.
But I think broadly speaking, this highlights, the value of our citywide plans from a policy standpoint, and then also then tracking that implementation, right? So we've only been tracking for about 3 years now, right? 2019 to 2022. The plan horizon is out to 2040. So we do have to have an understanding of how long it may take to implement many of these efforts. But the value is then to be tracking these metrics year over year. As we go further along in this plan, we're going to have a better idea of if we're starting to make an impact. Maybe 2 years is not enough to really understand what is being done for the East or East Central areas along Colfax. I'm sure Kurt Upton, who is our planning implementation manager, has been working on an MPI implementation structure similar to this, even more detailed though and more proactive. So I'm sure at some point we'll bring that to you guys. So I think it's definitely something that we're trying to conceptualize on how we're not only tracking these metrics, but also being really proactive on how we're strategic in deploying our resources programmatically to make an impact. So I think you can look at those implementation matrices and see certain things that maybe are even just simply identified on a program level, but we haven't actually started doing them. So there's a project status, and some of these things we already are completed, quote unquote. So they're in a green box, and some of them are yellow, saying they're ongoing or have been identified and been funded, and others are red, and they're like, we've identified it, but we're not started or haven't even identified how to actually move that strategy forward. So it gives you an idea from a timing standpoint as well of what we're working on today and what we hope to be working on in the future.
Okay, that's really good to know, because I think, when we ask, what are we doing about addressing vulnerability to displacement, particularly in nest neighborhoods where we're seeing this challenge get significantly larger. From a policy perspective, right? From a strategy perspective, and it's very difficult to find an answer.
Sure.
Or 5 answers or 10 answers, right? And so I think it would be nice for us who get asked these questions all the time to be able to say to our community, here are a list of ways other cities have tried to successfully, combat gentrification and displacement, or, and it's taken a full rounded approach of different agencies, et cetera. I don't know, but we are not getting those answers from staff who is doing the implementation. And so I'm wondering, I guess, whether that is just sort of like a disconnect in communications, or if it is because we don't have the answers because no one has been able to successfully do it yet. And there may not be an answer to that question, but it is the single biggest challenge that our residents face every day.
So yeah, I totally understand it. We do have DITO staff here if they want to potentially add on to this, but I wanted to highlight the implementation efforts. To your point, several of these here I think are directly about vulnerability to displacement, both from a business standpoint as well as from residential displacement with the prioritization policy and the social equity program. So those are just launching though, right, or kind of gearing up. So I think the point of taking a while to actually implement and to see some of these things come into action. But I think these are three items right now that are really going to make a difference here in the future.
Okay, really appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Next up, we have Councilwoman Sudbaca.
Thank you. Just to add on to the question or expectation going forward, Metrics. I would love to know what the goal metrics are for all of these new efforts. Do you have any?
So the metrics for,
Yeah, how will you know if each of these 4 programs are successful?
right, so I mean, these are implementation efforts for the larger policies within the document. So I don't know if these individual efforts, largely led by, CASAR here, or DITO, Host, Nest, et cetera, if they have metrics built into their programs. But I mean, at a larger scale, the intent would be to see an impact, in things like the maps that we have here that help us identify the changes to the vulnerability displacement data that we have in Blueprint Denver, or any of the metrics that we have that may be applicable to that, right? So
I'm super concerned that we don't have something that recognizes, a metric that recognizes when the map changes and the neighborhoods are no longer vulnerable to displacement. Is it because it's a new population? Mm-hmm. That map changing by itself is alone not a good metric to figure out if we've addressed displacement. And so I challenge the office to figure out a metric that helps us understand if we've been successful addressing vulnerability to displacement without relying on a map to change when it means that we've pushed out everyone who's vulnerable to displacement.
right. No, I understand. I'll take that back. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. So on your slides, you use this tool that I think we have. The slides aren't numbered, so it's the metrics highlight Blueprint Denver equity concept. Can you remind us where we can find that? It's online somewhere, but in my personal opinion, I don't feel like it's easy to navigate our website. It's not user-friendly. So
Is it the one that I have up right now?
Yeah, is this accessible to the public?
Yeah, absolutely. It's built right into the story map. And so on the Blueprint Denver website, there's a blue button that says click here for the annual report, and that's what you'd click on. Okay. And this map is built right into the story map, where we have a whole section on the equity concepts. Okay. And you can flip between the different maps. Okay. Zoom in, zoom out. You can search by address. You can turn layers on and off.
And so the map that you have up right now, is that a map that's changed? So for those who can't see, the light blue is shift to less vulnerable. The dark blue is shift to more vulnerable. Is that based on census data mixed in with our Blueprint Denver data, or how did some of those neighborhoods switch? What's the metrics?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of metrics in there, a lot of numbers. So each one of the equity concepts has a methodology with different data points. That's all detailed in there. And you can actually, if you are in this map, in the story map, there's a narrative on the left side that kind of explains the data at a high level, and then you can take a deeper dive. But there's typically between 3 or 5 different unique data points that we've combined into an index for each one of these. And so, like with, there's a lot of the equity index from DDPHE built into these, as well as things like access to centers and corridors. That's for the access opportunity one. Vulnerability to displacement was largely built off of a DITO index. And so those are outlined in the plan itself, as well as the appendix and the methodology, and then in the map itself. You can click on these maps when they're interactive, and it will literally show you, I think with vulnerability displacement, there's 3 different data points, and it will show you which one moved from less or more, so you can understand what made that shift.
Okay, and then my last question. I feel like a lot of times we work for years on these huge documents, and they should be living documents. We should be able to input information. So we have this data layer, we have this story map. But if I go to do a rezoning in my neighborhood as a legislative person, because that's who we are, we're land use commissioners up here as well, That's not in the plans. So our plans don't get updated as this information comes in, correct? So if I were doing, so for instance, on this map, Sloan's Lake, is part of Sloan's Lake neighborhood has shifted to vulnerable. When I rezoned that neighborhood for accessory dwelling units, I did not include that information because it's not in our adopted plan. It's on a website somewhere.
Right.
So how do we take the information that we're getting from the website and make sure that we're amending our adopted plan so that that language is up to date? Because I feel like a lot of times we get static with our adopted plans and we don't amend them often enough to make sure that we're living in the actual reality that we have.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the reason I'm here today, and I'm hopefully here every year to remind us that we really need to be using these as living documents. It's also an intent of how the neighborhood planning areas update the documents. So when those plans do get amended, or adopted, excuse me, those amend the Blueprint Denver maps. We would change the Blueprint Denver maps to reflect that. And so there's a way to keep at least the future places map and the context map up to date and be consistent with all of our area planning. We do also direct staff to use these equity concepts and things like rezoning. So even though the static map itself doesn't change. I mean, when staff presents a map amendment, we're using the latest data we have for the equity concepts in the review.
But it's not baked into the language of the adopted plan. So when you're writing a land use application, you have to use language that's baked into your adopted plans. That's one of the criteria that we have to vote on. So it's not the criteria that you can use the website. So if our language is not being amended and moving forward, I get where it's important to have a website, 100%.
Sure.
But if our language is not being reflected in that, in our plans, then we can't use them, because when you write, I don't know if you've ever sat on the other side of the table and actually had to write a rezoning application, you have to actually use language within our adopted plans. And so yes, you can use these metrics and you can create the narrative to back it up, but you still have to have the adopted language in that plan to get it, move it forward. So I just hope that when we adopted the 2010 zoning code, it was supposed to be a living document that we kept amending and that we kept looking at, and I just don't see that happening. I see that happening with Blueprint Denver, but things are changing. So I hope that we can be more flexible. I feel like sometimes in CPD we're rigid, where we do these plans and then we don't go back to visit them and change the narratives within the adopted language to reflect what's happening on the current environment. So that's just my feedback of having done this 10 years, is that we have to be able to be more flexible with these plans and actually amend the language as our landscape changes.
Sure. No, I noted, and I would just want to highlight, I mean, we acknowledge the need to be able to update the narrative. And then, so the reason of tracking, even on an annual basis, then gives us a better understanding of when do we need to crack open the actual adopted document and make changes at a higher level to make sure that the document is up to date. I came in front of Ludi and the council in 2019 when we adopted Blueprint Denver, and I was like, I hope we never have to re-adopt a brand new plan all over again. I like the idea that's built into Blueprint and the comprehensive plan is that every 5 to 7 years we'd be able to go in and revisit the document
but our city processes take so long that it has to be like 5 to get to 7.
So we're already thinking from a staff perspective on how we would actually fit that into a very
100%.
near work program.
Yes.
And so we're well aware of that, yeah.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for your presentation. I see no other speakers. So we'll move on to the other part of our agenda. Thank you, David.
Sure, thank you.
Next up, we have a rezoning.
586, right?
Yep.
This one?
Yep, we have rezoning 0586.
Good morning, council members. Brad Johnson, Community Planning and Development. Bringing you to this morning a rezoning request for 225 East Bayard Avenue from UTUB2 U03 to GMU3 U03. This is in Council District 7 in the Spear neighborhood. And the request again is for general urban neighborhood context, multi-unit with a maximum height of 3 stories or 40 feet. This allows more than 2 dwelling units on a lot in the urban house, duplex, garden court, townhouse, or apartment building forms. And this proposal is coming from the applicant that wishes to reuse this religious institution use and building as residential dwelling units. So again, here's just a little bit further zoomed in map on the site to give you a sense of the size of it. This is a 12,000 square foot site, so a little over a quarter of an acre, and it's about 95 foot wide on the Grant Street frontage there. Here's a map of the existing zoning. So you see it is currently that UTU B2, but you see it's kind of surrounded by some other 2-unit zoning as well as general urban multi-unit to the west and then off to the northeast. Existing land use on the site is that public, quasi-public, and you see a variety of different land uses in the immediate context, and then also up and down to the west and east along Bayard. Some photographs of the site down in the bottom middle, and then off to the west, you see the multi-unit apartment building there across the alley, across the street to the south. You see photos of some of there's a sort of small surface parking lots there today on either side of the intersection. On the bottom right is some single unit kind of traditional development across Grant Street, and then immediately to the north is a older 2-unit duplex building. I want to mention that the applicant has entered into an agreement with Historic Denver, which is a non-demolition agreement, which would stipulate that the building could not be demoed under that agreement for at least 10 years from the point it was signed. We followed the typical process for rezoning. We are here at Ludi and look ahead to potential City Council public hearing on July 11th of this year. We received 2 letters of support from the public. I'm mostly excited about the fact that that stipulation was there and that the intention was to keep that building where it was and reuse it for dwelling units. We heard some concerns both in the planning board hearing, some testimony, and I also received one more letter after that planning board hearing. Didn't say whether they were opposed or in favor, just voiced some concerns about parking demand that might be generated by the project and how that would impact on-street parking in that area. We didn't receive anything from an official R&O on this one. So moving to the criteria, we've got consistency with adopted plans. We found that it would be consistent with numerous goals and policies of Comp Plan 2040, just a couple of which are listed here. And moving to Blueprint Denver, we first will look at future neighborhood context, which is urban, which calls for multi-unit residential embedded in 1-unit and 2-unit residential areas. And so just as a reminder, they're asking for general urban zoning, so that's that kind of next level up. And you see there how the map is kind of like right on the edge between a general urban designation and its urban designation. So given that and the objectives for this particular rezoning with reuse of the existing structure and that agreement that the applicant signed onto with Historic Denver, we felt it appropriate to exercise this clause in Blueprint Denver to allow for a little bit more flexibility with how we interpret those designations of future place type or future neighborhood context. Future place type is low residential, so that's mostly single and 2-unit uses on smaller lots. But again, you see some of this language that is geared towards providing more flexibility around reuse or redevelopment of existing institutional uses, which this would be one. Future street type is local undesignated, and so that Blueprint Denver says the building forms and land uses next to a street like that can be of a wide variety, and so we did find that this rezoning would be consistent with future street type. Growth area strategy designation is all other areas of the city, and that means that all the properties with that designation collectively around the city are intended to accommodate 10% of new jobs and 20% of new housing through 2040. Given that this would increase the potential dwelling units on the site, we did find it to be consistent with growth area strategy, as it would allow for that kind of incremental increase in units. And then I mentioned that Blueprint Denver has a significant amount of language that's really pushing for flexibility and trying to encourage reuse and redevelopment of these institutional sites within residential context. I think this was, this is not a unique scenario necessarily in the city. And so here's some of that language that provides additional support, policy support for supporting rezoning like this. In terms of area plans, we also have the West Washington Park Neighborhood Plan. This is a fairly dated plan from 1991. It speaks a lot to maintaining the kind of residential character of the neighborhood. I pulled this one policy that speaks specifically to kind of trying to conserve, preserve architecturally unique structures, which I think this would be classified as one. So given that and the fact that this would maintain residential uses on the site, this particular zone district that they're looking at, we found to be consistent with this neighborhood plan. We also found that the rezoning would result in a uniform district regulations and further the public health, safety, and welfare of the community through implementation of our adopted plans. And justifying circumstances, again, look to that encouragement of in Blueprint Denver that says that it's a good thing to try to be a little bit more flexible about a rezoning for an institutional site like this that might be vacated, which that is the case here. The building is currently vacant. We also found that this rezoning would be consistent with neighborhood context, zone district, purpose, and intent. And I just realized I wanted to say something about that U03 that's on there that I accidentally skipped over. So U03 is a use overlay that is intended to provide flexibility for a designated historic structure. It allows additional flexibility around what uses could take place in a structure like that to try to encourage preservation of a building like that. This site has that U03, but it's currently not applicable since the structure is not actually designated right now. But if it were to be designated in the future, the applicant did apply to maintain that U03 overlay. So if it were designated in the future, that U03, the provisions of that part of the zoning code could kick in. So with that, we did recommend that this committee forward the rezoning to the full city council. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. Are there any comments or questions from, I have Councilwoman Torres.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Brad, just a clarification on the agreement with Historic Denver. Why just 10 years? Like, does that give them over a particular deadline? Because it's not a landmarked building, right? So what does the 10 years accomplish?
Yeah, that's correct. I think I'd rather have the applicant speak to that because we're not party to that agreement. It's kind of somewhat similar. It's not similar, but somewhat similar to a good neighbor agreement in that it's an agreement between the applicant and Historic Denver. So I don't know if Joe or Travis maybe want to speak to that choice.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brad. Councilwoman, thank you. The applicant and the owner, Travis McAfoos. So to answer your question, the goal of the project is preservation, the repurposing of the building and moving it to its next lifespan. There's no magic number with that 10 years. I think we started with a 5-year agreement, landed with a 10-year agreement, with the understanding that in that time frame, there'll be significant capital invested into that property, which will more than likely preserve it as it stands, which is the goal.
Okay. was there a discussion about landmarking it?
So the landmark process is something we will explore. It's time-consuming, lengthy, and has implications on how a property like this is redeveloped. And so I have a team that's going to be helping me with that process, but it's going to be after the rezoning.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. No other questions? Are there any objections moving this forward to the full council? Seeing none, we will move this on to the full council. Thank you very much.
Can I just get a motion in a second?
Oh, yes, sorry.
Yep.
All second.
Did you get it, Zach? Thank you. Thank you. Next up, we have the Parks and Rec Department, and they are going to talk about the designation of city parks throughout the city and county of Denver. And I'll let them take it from here.
About this very important project that we've been working on for close to a decade. I've been very honored to be a part of the team that is doing this work on park designation. So I am bringing the 13th round. We call it the 13th round. Technically, it's the 14th round because we did designate part of Red Rocks separately. So I will move through the PowerPoint.
Can you just introduce yourself for the record?
Yes, sorry. Scott Gilmore, Deputy Executive Director of Denver Parks and Recreation. And I want to acknowledge the amazing parks team that really does a lot of the work here. Kathy Lebeck, our Assistant Director of Planning. Jesus, who everybody knows Jesus, he's an amazing person in our marketing and communications team. Jason Morris, our city attorney. He always is trying to help us make sure we're protecting parkland. And a special acknowledgement to Greg Knightsky. He is our surveyor, our city surveyor. And I'll tell you what, if you want to know anything about historical aspects of parks and how parks have come to be in Denver, Greg Knightsky is the person to go to. So some other individuals I definitely want to acknowledge is the Park Designation Committee that was put together about a decade ago to help us move this work forward. The Park Designation Committee was actually some individuals that were suggested to us by INC, the Inter-Neighborhood Cooperation, Jay Rust, Kathleen Rust, Brad Cameron, and some others have been on that committee. So they have been a great asset to this work. And also the Parks and Rec Advisory Board. Historically, I've always taken this presentation to them prior to bringing it to council. There's been some committee work actually that has changed on the PRAB committee. So I actually did forward this presentation to all the PRAB members last night just to make sure that they're aware that I was bringing this to council. So basically, you guys have the presentation. I'm going to go over a few things. Park system history. We have an amazing historical park system, and it goes back to 1858 when, you know, the city was founded. The first park was Curtis Park in 1868. That is pretty amazing that we have a park that goes back to that far. The Parks Board was created in 1893. A big important thing about this is that another highlight, though, first is 1910, our mountain park system was created. That was before the National Park Service was created. So to think that we had a mountain park system before this nation did is pretty phenomenal and very progressive for a city to do the work that we've done. In 1956, prior to 1956, the Parks Department was part of the Department of Improvements in Parks, which really was the forerunner to Public Works and then Department of Transportation and Infrastructure. In 1956, when the city charter was ratified, we were taken out and we became the Department of Parks and Recreation. The reason that date is so critical and important is that is the date that any parcels that were being managed and acquired or developed under our management, under Parks Management, actually were officially designated. So that's where designation came from. It was part of the charter. Future park designations have to go through this process. So anything prior to 56 was officially designated when the charter was signed. Anything after that has had to go through this process. So designation, to designate a park, and just so everyone knows, to designate a park actually is to basically protect a park from any kind of future development, from sale, any parcel that is designated cannot be disposed of, cannot be sold, cannot be given away, cannot be anything, and it has to be used for a park purpose. And so that protects our parkland. The only way you can dispose of a parcel is technically by a vote of the public, which has been tried once on a parcel in the it's across the street from Vanderbilt Park. It's part of the Broadway development now, and actually that parcel that was back in the 70s, was tried to be disposed of by a vote of the public. It was soundly defeated by like 70-30. And that parcel now actually is going to become one of the newest parks in our system as that development moves forward. Designation considerations, it supports a master plan and has historical, cultural, ecological, or educational significance, has scenic, visual corridor protections, preservation. It actually is part of the infrastructure and utilities are not in a state of flux. That means that we're not going to run a major water line through an area or a utility line or things like that. A big one actually that's really important is there's no title or ownership issues, and that we have to outright own parcels to designate them. We can't designate something we don't own. And so a couple examples of that is parts of the Kennedy Sports Complex and the golf course are actually are owned by the Corps of Engineers because it actually is part of the drainage and the floodway for Cherry Creek Dam. And so another one, a great example that we have actually worked on, the Den Open Space, which is a 200-acre open space on the eastern side of the Rocky Mountain Arsenal National Wildlife Refuge. That is a partnership with the Den, the airport, and it is considered the largest open space in the city and county of Denver. Because it is owned by the airport, we cannot designate something that's owned by a different sister agency. But we do manage it as an open space and public has access to it. And there's no anticipated plans for making or expanding non-park uses within that space. So this process has been going on for a decade. And like I said, I've been quite honored to be a part of it. A lot of people have been involved with it. Beginning in 2013, that is when we started with the first round. Approximately 68% of our park system was designated at that time. As you can see, as I said, we have been through 14 rounds of this. You can look at these numbers and it goes up. It goes up to 72, 78, 82, 84, sixth round, 85, but then it goes down in the seventh round. The reason it goes up and down sometimes is because we acquire parcels and we acquire land. So depending on the amount of land that we acquire, it might make these percentages of the parkland that we have designated go up and down. You can see the Red Rocks edition in 2016. That is an amazing partnership that we have with Arts and Venues, and they had a parcel of 96 acres that was adjacent to Red Rocks, and it was along a creek bed where we wanted to build a trail, and working with Arts and Venues and the team there, they actually turned that 98 acres over to Parks and Recreation, and we added it to the Red Rocks system and then designated it. As you can see, the numbers go back up to 81, 82, 84, and 82 in the 12th round. And so we're technically on the 13th round, and after we designate these 36 acres, after you guys approve this, hopefully, 81% of our urban park system will be designated as parkland. So just as an overview, this is our city, and it shows our maintenance districts, our 4 main maintenance districts: southwest, northwest, northeast, and east. And then it also has our downtown park operations team, which is a maintenance districts of it all. And then it's overlaid over your city council districts that you are responsible for. I pulled this one out separately because our mountain park system is pretty spectacular. We have parks not only in Denver, but we have parks in 5 different counties. And the reason I really wanted to highlight this was it's a massive system. It's over 14,000 acres, and we have Daniel Parks, which is in Douglas County, which is where one of our bison herds is, a beautiful, beautiful park. But we have just recently added Axton Ranch, which is in Gilpin County and Jefferson County. It's about approximately 450 acres. It is a significant addition to our park system, which was basically donated to the city and county of Denver for us to preserve for future generations. And that's super exciting. So currently, this is our designated park. This is kind of how we kind of look at things. We have the green designated parks. Blue is partially designated parks, and red are non-designated parks or open space. And so, like I said, some of those can be designated, some of them can't. As we move forward, we will continue to try to identify parcels that can be designated, or as we acquire parcels, which you'll see in this presentation, we will work on designating those. And as you can see, there is a parcel in here along Bear Creek that is partially designated in this map, and then we'll follow up on that one. So the very first one, park designations, round 13. Here's a list of the parks, and I'll go through them on the maps to just kind of highlight them for you. Total of 36.3 acres. I want to highlight what's at the bottom of this map, which is really, really important. The designation of parklands from 1956, when the charter was signed, to 2012, when I moved into this role, this administration started. That's 56 years. Approximately 600 acres of parkland was designated and protected. From 2013, when we really started this process, really 2012, to 2021, which is basically a 10-year period, 2022, approximately 1,300 acres of parkland have been designated, twice as much as the prior 56 years. This has been, like I said, the parks team has been huge on doing this work. It's quite a bit of work to do the survey work and making sure the legal documents are done correctly. So I just want to, again, acknowledge the hard work that they've done. I also want to add in that there's times where people say that we haven't grown our park system. We have worked incredibly hard to identify parcels and to acquire parcels and to add them to our park system. And from 2013 to 2022, we have added 1,226 acres of parkland to our system. And like I said, designated parkland cannot be sold or disposed of without our approval of the voters. So I'm gonna go through the maps. As you can see, it's these designations a lot of times are all over the city in all the different council districts. So these are the proposed designations. You can see them all in red. As you can see, they're all over the city. Very exciting projects, and every single one has different nuances related to it. So the first one is, and this one highlights that as we have done this work, we have made adjustments. This has been a process that we make adjustments and we change how we see what we should designate and what we shouldn't. This is a great one. This is actually the Bear Creek Park. This is a large park that was partially designated. We designated this early in the process, this whole park, and we left out this section because the YMCA building sits on this site. That YMCA building is a Denver facility. It's a Denver Park facility that they lease. And so we want to make sure that we're protecting all parkland in the city and county of Denver. So we have gone back and we will be designating the YMCA site as part of this park, and that will actually make this whole parcel, which was partially designated, fully designated. The next one, this is a great project that happened with the support of Xcel Energy. Xcel Energy actually had 2 transfer stations probably 8 years ago that they were looking at trying to dispose of, and there was another one in the Westwood neighborhood at Irving in Kentucky, and Westwood, Xcel Energy was generous enough to sell those to the city and county of Denver for the total cost of $50,000. So we actually got 2 parks that this one has been built out, and we are actually working with Trust for Public Land to build out the one in Westwood neighborhood. And we got these pieces of property for a small amount and have built some pretty amazing spaces. If anyone's ever been by this park in Fairfax, this park is probably one of the busiest parks now in the city and county of Denver. It is pretty spectacular, and it's a beautiful, beautiful space. So those are the types of partnerships that we look for that we can take advantage of and work with groups like Xcel to make these things happen. This is actually a Gateway Landing. This is in the far northeast, basically very close to the Northfield campus out there. And this was another partnership with a developer that they were required to provide an acre of land for a park, and we had the ability to acquire some additional acreage to make it a more viable park space. So this is actually Gateway Landing, and it's approximately 3 acres, I believe. Yes. Next one. This one was definitely a labor of love for Councilwoman Black. I know she had definitely contacted Denver Parks and Recreation to definitely look into this community and try to find a space to build a park in this park desert. This neighborhood was definitely at the heart of a lack of any kind of park space within a 10-minute walk. This whole community, to get to a viable park, would actually have to run across Colorado Boulevard. So we were looking at this area, and this is actually the ground cover nursery that was in this community. And they had actually gotten quite a few offers to buy this property by developers, and they did not sell. And lo and behold, the parks team reached out to ground cover, and they were like, you know what, that fits with what we'd like to see this site become. And so this is moving forward this year with a master plan, and we will designate it because it will be a park that this community can enjoy forever as a designated park. So thank you, Councilwoman Black. This one actually, these next 2 are actually great examples of partnerships with nonprofits. This one is the Montbello Open Space. This is a 5.5 acre parcel that was acquired through Environmental Kids working with, or ELK for short, working with the Trust for Public Land. And they were able to acquire this 5.5 acre site and in the heart of Montbello. And this site actually now is probably one of the most spectacular nature parks in the country. And at this time, there's an education center being built, and so we are moving forward with designating this park. This is a partnership with Environmental Learning for Kids, and this has been hugely successful and is a national model to work with nonprofits. The next one is similar. This is actually Platform Open Space, and this is a series of parcels that some of them were owned by Xcel and others, and we have worked with Groundwork Denver to actually create a beautiful open space on these parcels that actually takes you through the community. It is adjacent to Argo, and it has become a very, very beautiful open space for this community too. So we are moving forward with designation of these parcels as the Platform Open Space. This one is actually in the Central Park neighborhood. These are parcels that are part of the Upland Park. This is another partnership with a developer that was originally Forest City that now is Brookfield. There was a requirement to create a certain amount of open space, and so Brookfield at this point is building out these parks, and after they hold them for a couple years, we make sure that they're up to park standards, they're growing in well, they're beautiful public spaces. They are turned over to the city and county of Denver, and then once they are turned over to our ownership, we are able to designate them. So that is what these upland parks are. This one is really cool. This is one that was something that we had, as a Parks Department, we had looked at. This is the Westwood Park edition. Westwood Park has gone through a lot of transformation over the past few years. Not only has it been reimagined, new trails, new sidewalks, new lights, fitness zone, new playground, new pavilion, the whole thing has been reimagined. Prior to the Legacy Fund being enacted a few years back, we always would look at parcels and want to acquire them, and it was just a struggle for us to do that. And once the Legacy Fund was approved by the voters of Denver, and thank you, Councilman Clark, for all your support of that effort, because it has been a huge, huge benefit to not only the Parks Department, but the citizens of Denver, because we can now make these things happen. There was a house on this parcel that actually cut the park off from basically the road. And we had always looked at one house would make a huge difference to this park, and that was the house. And it came up for sale, and we were able to acquire it and to expand this park. So the rest of the park is actually designated. So we are moving forward with designating this parcel that we acquired, and we have added to the park. So that is very, very exciting. So we are requesting an approval of park designation of all the ones I've went through. Like I said, this is very exciting. This process continues on, and I believe, are there any questions or comments? The one thing I did want to mention to you, though, is I will provide you after this afternoon. What I'll do is I'll send out to everybody on council a list of all the park designations by each one. We have designated over 70 parcels in this city during this process. We will also send you out a list of those acquisitions that I mentioned, the 1,236 acres that we have acquired. I'll send you out those two lists just so you have that information. So if you have any questions, you can follow up with me, and I'll provide you with any follow-ups. So any questions or comments?
Any questions or comments from my colleagues? Councilwoman Sita Baca?
Thank you. I have a request as we prepare for mayoral transition. Is it possible for the ArcGIS team to get in there and potentially create a map that is interactive for the public, where they could, pull up all of the parkland and click on each park and see the details of when it was platted, when it was, who it was named after, maybe linked to the history, that kind of thing? Because we get a lot of questions like that and don't really expect to send them all to our friend Nishi Greg over here, but it would be nice to have that kind of tool.
I think that could be a possibility for sure, because right now we do have a park map where you can go and you click on it and you can pull up the map. You can see what kind of amenities are in the park, like playground and picnic tables and all those other things. So I will check with our team to see how we can do it. Like I said, we do have a pretty significant park system. It's close to 280 parks now, so that would be something that would take some effort. But that could also be a possible project for like the landscape group at the University of Colorado Denver, the planning group. So there could be some possibilities of things that we can work with the school to really give them real world knowledge about what we do in a system, and also not take all of Greg's time trying to do something like this. So we will look into that.
It would be awesome to capture all this hard work. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Councilwoman Torres.
Thank you. Scott, just thanks a ton. I think the addition of that half acre for Westwood Park really opens up the access to it. It's beautiful. And always just amazing to be able to add to West Denver's just park, I think, directory and database, because it's so hard to add new parks in West Denver.
Yes.
And we're, our green space is typically connected to our gulches. So thanks for the work.
Yeah, and that brings up a great point, Councilwoman Torres, that we as a department, when we started this process, there was spaces that we looked at and we said, oh, no, that's not appropriate to maybe designate or count as parkland. But 10 years ago, we might have looked at 39th Channel, which is a beautiful space that now has been created, beautiful trail. It's got a playground in it. It's really beautiful. We would have looked at that and, oh, maybe it's drainage and maybe we shouldn't designate that. But that is a space that is a beautiful park space. And that's what people see. And so those are things that we as a department have changed how we look at what we can designate and what we can, and what sometimes we call parkland and what we don't. We do have to protect as much as possible the green space that we as people that live in Denver cherish.
Thank you. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councilman Black?
Thank you for designating 1,200 acres of parkland since you've had this job.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilwoman Black. And yes, thank you. I think one of the unique things when I hear people coming to Denver is how great parks we have and how utilized they are. And I think during COVID, we saw an uptick of utilization in our parks, which it's great. But on the flip side of that, I think it puts some wear and tear on our parks that actually need some more maintenance. So however we can support you in this upcoming budgeting process because of the great amenities that we do have in Denver and all of the park benches and however we can support you, please let us know, because these are gems and that make Denver a very unique place. And with that, I think we have to have we have a mover and a second. So I think we're done. Seeing no other issues, I think this committee's adjourned. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.